We're back again on Lutherans Alive with Melissa Stobert, a social worker at St. John's Home in Mars and a member of St. Paul's Church in Sarver. Melissa, thanks again for taking the time to come in.
My pleasure.
And to help us understand that illness that we've come to know as Alzheimer's disease. We did a good job, I think, talking about symptoms and beginning that rule-out process in the first segment. And we wanted to talk a bit this time about the process then that a family or an individual may be confronted with when we begin dealing with physicians and talking about the possibilities of institutionalization and what kinds of levels of care might be available. Where would we start in terms of addressing those kinds of things?
Well, you know, as we touched on before, it's certainly one of the biggest decisions that a family is going to make as far as placement in a long-term care facility. So many of our elderly residents have, you know, made a family member promise to never place me in a long-term care facility. Don't ever send me to a home. And back in the day, you know, families were able to provide care at home much more easily, and it was even more expected back then. Today, with the way things are and families working, both husbands and wives having full-time jobs, it's very difficult to provide care in the home setting. And it is absolutely one of the most difficult jobs anyone will ever experience, being a caregiver, especially for someone with Alzheimer's disease. It's a 24-hour-a-day job. So I think that, you know, if someone is providing care in the home setting and they're starting to question the individual's safety, you know, that's of utmost concern. When you have someone with Alzheimer's disease, their safety awareness becomes quite poor, and they become really quite a danger to themselves, even in an environment that is very familiar to them. I tell families sometimes that Alzheimer's disease is probably one of the most difficult diseases you can experience with your loved one, because sadly, you're losing your loved one twice. You know, you're losing the person that you once knew, the mom, the dad, the spouse that you knew, that raised you, that you lived with all of your life, because they're becoming unaware of who you are. They no longer recognize who you are. And that is very, very difficult for a family member to experience that. So you've kind of lost the person that you know, and then when they actually pass away years down the road, you're mourning them again. So it really is a devastating disease. But getting back to some of the early signs as far as, you know, looking for placement, I think that safety is at the top of the list. Once you start to question their safety, that's when you start to need to look outside of the home for support. First step would probably be going to your family doctor and letting them know the symptoms that you're seeing and the concerns that you're having, and see what your family physician is recommending. The Area Agency on Aging is also a wonderful community resource for elderly as well as their families if they're looking for someone that they're caring for. So certainly they're two good starting places. The Area Agency on Aging has an options division where they will come to the home and they will assess your loved one for appropriate level of care. And they're the experts in that field. So they would be able to tell you, you know, there are personal care homes that would be able to meet your loved one's needs. Or possibly if they've progressed past that point, then maybe they would be indicating that your loved one warrants long-term nursing care. So they can be, you know, a really good resource as well. A lot of times what ends up happening, though, it's not too often that we see someone admitted to a long-term care facility directly from home, because a lot of times what happens is there ends up being a hospital stay for one reason or another. You know, maybe it's a fall, or maybe a pneumonia, or maybe it's just increased confusion that has come on very suddenly, and the family's unsure why, so they end up being, you know, hospitalized for a brief period. Very often it is at that point that a referral is made to a long-term care facility. So the social worker at a hospital, if your loved one ends up being hospitalized, would certainly be a good resource.
Unfortunately, it sounds like that very well, or at least somewhat often, might be the case, is that the lack of recognition or the poor judgment that you've already mentioned leads to an accident or an illness or something, and that hospital stay is what gets everyone's attention.
That's right.
To the point that something really needs to be done.
That's right.
And I guess the good news is in places like Western Pennsylvania where we are, the senior population is high, so the level of care and the opportunities for care are out there. There are homes, there are institutions that are geared for this kind of care, and St. John's, of course, would be one of them.
Right. There are, several different levels of care, and for those who are in the earlier stages of the disease, a lot of times personal care is sufficient. You might warrant personal care if your loved one with Alzheimer's disease is still pretty high functioning, but needs 24-hour supervision that maybe you're not able to provide in the home. Mm-hmm. Then long-term care is for those individuals who really need someone to assist them throughout their activities of daily living. So they really need assistance physically and functionally, in addition to more than likely needing a secured environment because of their cognitive impairment. Mm-hmm. So, there are two levels. There's also independent living, of course, and facilities that provide the levels of care. Maybe you enter independent living and then you progress through the stages if you would need to. Yeah.
As you say, it's important to have the doctor's involvement along the way as those decisions and the diagnosis is being made. What's usually the first exposure or experience with the social worker?
When entering a long-term care setting? Well, certainly when someone is admitted to long-term care, we are one of the first staff members that the family and the resident will encounter. And, I know in speaking from the social work department at St. John, we really want to make sure that the family understands the routine of St. John, what will be expected, mm-hmm. The daily routine. That we want to make sure that the residents are acclimated to their environment. We want to make sure that they're aware of who's there to help them and what activities are available for them to become involved in.
We do have to take another break, but when we come back, let's talk a little bit more about the progression then over the course of a person's stay, the different ways that the social worker can be helpful and involved.
Okay.
We'll be right back.